Welcome to Cracked Open, a podcast about life, love, loss, and the truths we discover along the way. Together, we'll explore the struggles that shape us, the lessons we carry, and the hope that keeps us moving forward. This is more than stories. It's honesty. It's healing. It's real. Let's get started. And now your host, Glen Nunes.
Hey, this is Glen Nunes, and welcome back to Cracked Open. First of all, I want to thank everyone who continues to listen, subscribe, comment, and share this podcast. And everything you do, whether it is liking or sharing or commenting, it all helps. So this show started as a place to have like real conversations about life, the struggles, the healing, lessons, and faith that helps us get through it all. So today's episode, I want to talk about homelessness. And the name of this episode, which is 13 in season 2, is called Homeless. Most people think that homelessness is a problem that happens somewhere else to somewhere else. So we like to believe homelessness is something that happens to other people. But sometimes the distance between stability and sleeping in your car, it's one broken relationship, it's one lost job, or just one unexpected moment that life just throws at you. And one more thing that hits hard emotionally is the truth about homelessness. It's uncomfortable because it reminds us that security in life is more fragile than we want to admit. And now, before we get into this topic, I want you to just pause for a moment and think about something. When you hear the word homeless, what picture comes into your mind? And stop right now and think about it. Say it to yourself and then picture that in your head. Is it someone on a street corner? Someone sleeping on a bench? Someone holding a sign at a traffic light? Most of us think that we understand what homelessness looks like, but the truth is many of us are a lot closer to it than we ever could realize. One bad break, one lost job, one medical emergency, one broken relationship. Sometimes life can change overnight. And tonight, or today if you're listening, we're going to talk about that reality, the human side of homelessness, the stories behind it, the misconceptions around it, and why compassion and understanding matter more now than ever. Because the truth is, homelessness isn't just a statistic. It's people with stories, people with families, people with dreams that didn't turn out the way they planned. Okay, so let's talk about it. So this is Cracked Open. So I'm going to ask you a question. When was the last time you actually stopped and just talked to someone who is homeless? Is this you, the person that just walks past someone on the street, try to avoid eye contact, assuming addiction or laziness? Or are you one of these people say, get a job? What, is it fear, or is it fear versus compassion? And then before we go any further, I'm going to ask you another question. So when was the last time you actually saw someone who was homeless? Maybe it was someone sitting on a sidewalk. Maybe someone holding a cardboard sign at a traffic light. Maybe someone sleeping on a bench in the city. And be honest with yourself for a second. What was the first thing that went through your mind? Did you feel compassion? Did you feel uncomfortable? Or did you just keep walking, pretending you didn't even see them? Because the truth is, most of us don't know what to do in these moments. Some of you may be saying to yourself, they must have done something wrong to end up there. Others assume drugs or alcohol must be the reason. Some people want to help, but they don't know how. And a lot of us, if we're really honest, just look the other way. But the reality is, homelessness is far more complicated than most people realize. It's not always about addiction. It's not always bad choices. Sometimes it's medical bills. Sometimes it's divorce. Sometimes it's losing a job. Sometimes it's mental health. And sometimes it's just life hitting someone harder than they were prepared for. The scary part is many people living normal lives right now are only 1 or 2 bad breaks away from being in that exact same position. And that's something most of us do not even want to think about. But today, or tonight when you're listening, we're going to talk about it. So I was online when I'm doing my research and I'm looking for stuff. I came across this guy. His name is Tony. I believe his name is called The Boss, his page or whatever he's his title is. And he was doing something pretty incredible. What he does is he approaches homeless people. He asks them if they're hungry, and then he just starts talking to them. And then he kind of helps them rebuild. I will put a link in the description to some of the stuff he does, some of his videos. But what he does is he raises money at first for them. He does it like individually. He gets their name and he asks them if they really want to get off the streets. And he's done it for many people. And he raises money, and then he either gets them in rehab or he helps them get an apartment. It's incredible. He helps them get jobs. I'll have to put the link so you can watch what he does. He runs like a GoFundMe for them individually, and he raises funds, and he explains to them there's a lot of people out there that would love to help. And if the person's serious, they take him up on his offer. He really gets them off the streets, and he helps them, and he shows them there is a way out. Because they're just in a bad position because they didn't expect to be there, but unfortunately they are. I think this guy Tony's in the Boston area, but I'm not 100% sure. But what he does is just unbelievable. Like I said, he approaches these people who are homeless, and he sees them sitting on sidewalks or living on the streets. And the first thing he does, he just talks to them like they're human beings, and he asks them a couple of simple questions like, are you hungry? Are you okay? You want something to eat? Things like this. And sometimes those conversations turn into something way bigger. He asks them if they actually want to get off the streets. And not everyone does. But the ones who do, he tries to help them rebuild their lives. And it's very moving. And some of the videos, he's raised money to help people get their first apartments and maybe first and last security deposits, things like that. Even helping them find jobs. He sits with them, he listens to their stories, and he treats them with dignity. Something a lot of people living on the streets rarely experience anymore is dignity. And it's important to show people that. And when you watch these conversations, you start to realize something really important, that most of these people aren't just statistics. They're people with stories, people who had families, who had jobs, they had hopes, and they had dreams at one point. People who at one time were living just a normal life, just like the rest of us. The church I go to, I talk about church a lot. There was a shelter down in New Bedford, and those of you that aren't from around here that are listening, it's a city around where we all live, and it's a distressed area, and there's a homeless shelter down there. Our church would actually cook breakfast for the homeless at a homeless shelter facility, and we would volunteer, and I've done it, and I highly recommend doing this. But what's cool about it is, I believe it was like a Saturday morning that we would do this, and you have to show up very early to do all the prep work. But they invite all the homeless people that are living in the streets and that don't have anything to eat, and we invite them in. But what's cool about it is that I learned a lot from it. It really moved me the first time I did it, and it made me feel like really good. You see these people, they come in, and what we do is we don't just, put the food on a line and slop it on a plate and say, here you go, and hand it to them like they're walking through a cafeteria. They get to sit down at the table, and we go up to them just like a waitress would, ask them what they want to drink, ask them what they would like to eat, take their order like they're a normal person, which they are. And they get to put their order in, and then the cooks, whoever's donating their time in the kitchen, we cook it for them, and then we bring it out, and they get to eat like they're in a regular restaurant, like a normal person. It just gives them so much more dignity. And the first time I did it, I just thought it was an awesome gesture. And I was like, wow, that is really cool. So anyways, getting back off track, I just wanted to say that giving people dignity is just a very important thing to do. And like I said, these people, they're not just statistics, man. They're human beings. None of us would ever want to be in that position. I'm sure none of them would. I'm sure all these people, when you look at anybody in a tough position, when they were kids, little kids, they didn't grow up saying, hey, I want to be on crack, or I want to be on drugs, or I'm going to be a homeless person when I get older. Everybody has their reasons why they're there. Everybody has their own story. So anyway, I will be including the link to his page and a playlist from some of those videos that I talked about in the description of this episode, because what he's doing is powerful, and it reminds us that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stop, listen, and care. And that guy, he's probably blessed himself just for doing it, for the feeling he's getting, but also he's blessing other people. It's just, he's a great guy. I don't know who he is either. I never talked to him, never met him. And from watching these videos of this guy, made me really start thinking about a few things. Over the years, I've had a few moments where people who are homeless approached me or I've approached them. And a couple of things have stuck with me. I want to tell you about a couple of stories, and not because they were asking for money or whatever situation they were in, but more I want to tell you about this because of the conversations that happen. Because when you stop and you actually talk to someone who's struggling, you start to realize very quickly that there's usually a story behind how they ended up there. And sometimes those stories are heartbreaking. Sometimes it's addiction. Sometimes it's mental health. Sometimes it's a job loss, like I said, a broken relationship or something that just spiraled out of control. But one thing I have noticed in moments like this, a lot of these people just want to be seen. They want someone to acknowledge that they even exist. And some of them don't, but some of them do. And they don't want you to just walk past them like they're invisible or just not an actual person. So a couple of the conversations that I've witnessed, I want to just share with you. I'll just share with you a few of them. So what I do is when I start talking to anybody I know is homeless or on the streets, the first thing I say to them is, can I ask you a question? They usually say, sure. I say, how did you get here? I'm just wondering, everybody has a story, but just curious how you get here. And you'd be surprised when they feel that you're just talking to them like a person, like asking them an honest, sincere question. They will actually tell you. So I'll give you an example. I approached this girl, Doreen, and she looked like she was either in her late 20s or early 30s, and she might have been older. I don't even know the age, but I approached her and I just asked her a couple of questions. First, how'd she get there? And she just opened up to me and was so honest with me. And she said, I'm living in this tent and I'm living with my boyfriend in the tent. So her significant other was living with her. It's just sad. And she says, he's out trying to get a job today. And he is actually looking around. And she went to this whole story of how she got there. She said, I actually had a job and I'm really trying and I just can't do it. I suffer from anxiety and just dealing with everyday life and the stress. And I try to hold a job and I get distracted. And then this happens and that happens. And she gets fired and she gets discouraged. And even through interview process, she wouldn't even get an opportunity. But when she did have an opportunity, she failed at it. She felt like she failed at it because all these reasons. And I just like, okay. And she said, so I really want to work and I want to do that and I want to do the right thing, but I can't. She was mentally, I'm not incapable and I'm really trying. And she was so sincere about it. And I said, hey, I understand that. I totally understand. And she said that they had saved enough money. They were trying to get an apartment. First, last security, and the boyfriend was trying to work. She was so honest when I heard her story. She never denied anything about drugs or never tried to make excuses. She just said, yeah, we're both in a tough position, but we're trying to get out of it. And I'm trying to get off drugs. I've been clean for a month. He's been clean for 3 months or whatever. She told me her whole story. And I could see that they were making an effort. And I actually gave her a business card for a teen challenge. I told her to call there. And I said, there's people out in this world that the programs that really can help and not judge you. I did explain to her that sometimes it might be good to go to a Christian-based rehab facility or talk to somebody, because a lot of those, from my research, seems like they're the most successful ones of actually people getting out of their ruts or changing their lives. So anyway, that was one story, and it was just moving. And then another story, I was at work. I was walking to the store. And it was like a small grocery store, and it was freezing out that day. It was freezing. And I looked over about 25 feet to the right. This guy was not even at the door asking for money. He did have a sign, said, please help or whatever. And he was sitting on the ground, the freezing cold ground, leaning against the building, not even at the door. And I went into the store. I did my job. And then I came out and I walked over to him. And I said, hey, buddy, what's up? And he said, not much. And I said, what's your name? And he gave me his name. We started talking and seemed like a decent guy and never asked me for a dime. And I just started talking to him and asked him the same question. Say, hey, man, how'd you get to this point? Like, how'd you get here? I'm just curious. I said, I'm not judging. I just like to know. And he opened up and he told me the same thing. He told me the truth. And I'm not going to get into his whole story, but it was interesting. And I told him there's programs, and I tried that. I'm not going there because of this. And he had reasons why. I understand these programs, if you're not 100% clean, you can't go to the shelters if you're high or if you got alcohol in your breath. And I understand that, the way these shelters run sometimes. I don't understand it, but they have policies in place. And I said, listen, man, it's freezing out. You're going to end up freezing to death. I said, I don't normally give people money anymore. I used to, but I gave him some money. I gave him like $10 just to go get something to eat. And I said, I would rather give you some money for you to get a hotel tonight because it's really freezing and you could die. He said, nope, I don't want that. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to use it for a hotel. So I won't accept the money. I was like, wow. He said, I'll be fine. I've been surviving. And it's just a sad story. And I end up leaving that conversation saying, wow, I got in my car. I was just like, wow. And the third one was just recently. I met this guy. I had just rented a car and I was dropping it off. And I was walking a couple of miles to go pick up my car at the collision place where it was at. And I met this kid and I approached him from behind and I didn't realize I startled him. And he turned around. I said, oh, man, I'm sorry. He said, I didn't see you walking behind me. I said, yeah, I was just walking. So I stopped and I just talked to him. So, hey, man, what's your name? He told me his name. I said, I'm Glen. I told him I was just walking because I was picking up my car and whatever. And I just started talking and asked him the same question. I said, hey, man, you're a pretty young guy. I said, how'd you end up here? I just ask you that. So he opened up to me and he told me his whole story. When I asked him straight out, I said, are you using it? Do you have a drug problem? He said, yeah, I do. I quit for a while, but yes, I'm using drugs and that's the reason I'm here. But he didn't make any excuses. He said, I'm not making any excuses. I know this is my own fault. And he was just very honest. And I said, hey, man, you know there's ways out of here. Do you believe that? He goes, yeah, I know, I tried. And I said, no, there's exit plans. You can definitely get off the streets if you want to. He goes, I really want to. I said, do you really mean that? He said, yeah, but I've accepted this. And he went on and he gave up hope. And he said, this is what I've come to. So I said, okay, so you've given up hope. I said, let me ask you a question. He said, what? I said, do you have any kids? And he looked me right in the eye. I said, I do. I said, okay. I said, what do you have? He goes, I have a son. I said, a little son? Yeah. What's his name? And as he told me his son's name, when I looked him in the eye and said, you should do it for him if you don't want to do it for yourself right now. And he got very teary-eyed and it hit him hard and it really made him think. And this kid's been on my mind. I've been driving by there just to run into him, to have a conversation with him. And then we had this massive snowstorm, feet of snow. I was thinking of this kid and actually all the homeless people thinking, wow, we're just worried about our electric going off or our power going off. It just makes you think. But after telling you about each one of these conversations, it reminds me of something important. Homelessness doesn't always look the way we think it does. Sometimes it looks like someone who just lost everything. Sometimes it looks like someone who made just a bad decision. And sometimes it looks like someone who simply ran out of options. But if anyone listening thinks that this could never happen to them, I just want to tell you about a time in my life when I didn't have a home either. And before anyone listening thinks this could never happen to them, I'm going to share a small story that happened to me years ago. After a situation in my life where I had to actually leave a home, I was living with somebody. I had moved in and the relationship ended and I had to leave. And I left the house. It was a terrible ending. And I actually took my dog and lived in my car for a few days. And then a buddy of mine had called me. There was a snowstorm going on. I was driving around at 2 o'clock in the morning and he said, why are you out driving? He's a firefighter. And I told him what happened. He said, come by the station. Come by here. You can stay here. And I said, I have the dog. He said, bring the dog. So me and my boy Marshall, we stayed at the fire station for a couple of days. And then my sister called me and I told her what was going on. And then she asked me to come stay with her in-law apartment. And I did that for 2 weeks. And I just got on the phone and started going crazy. And within 2 weeks, I found myself a place. And that's where I'm at now. But that being said, it was the first time in my life where I actually didn't have a roof over my head, which is crazy. And let's be careful now when we talk about other people who are claiming to be homeless, because people will use it against you and put a burden on you if you're not aware of what's going on. Some people claim to be homeless, but they're not. It's just a choice. And go back to the narcissism episode. You have to be careful of that as well, because some people will act like they're homeless, but it's just a decision they're making. So you have to analyze everything, because people will beat you down and make you feel sorry for them. But just remember, it's not your fault by their decision. So be careful in certain situations. This episode is about real homelessness, not people taking advantage of people. This is people who can't take care of themselves or in a position where they need help or need compassion. Okay? Just keep that in the back of your head. When I talk about my situation, how I was considered homeless for a few days, when I had to leave my rebound relationship that I got in, the person I was leaving, her own sister, wanted me to stay on the property and said they were going to move her out. And I'm like, I cannot do that. But people have to take responsibility for themselves and not be a burden on liability to others. And that's what I said. I have to step up and I have to get out of here and figure this out. Because when my time there was over, I knew it. And sometimes life puts you in situations where the chapter closes, whether you're ready or not. And when that happens, you got to make a choice. You can stay where you're not supposed to be, or you can just leave and stand on your own 2 feet and figure it out. So I chose to leave. I wasn't going to be a burden or a sleaze bag or anything like that. I packed up. I put my dog in the car. I drove off into the cold with no real plan. For a few days, I was homeless, but sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel comfortable. Sometimes doing the right thing means starting over, and you just have to do it. You have to step up, and that's what a man does. So when my welcome was over, I didn't fight it. I didn't argue it. I didn't try to hang on to something that was finished. I packed up my things, got in my car with my dog, and I left. And sometimes being a man means accepting when something is over and figuring out your next steps. And for me, that next step meant sleeping in the car for a few nights in the middle of a snowstorm, but I figured it out. And like I said, when my welcome was over, I didn't try to stay where I didn't belong anymore. It is amazing how fast life can change. And that's when I realized something that changed how I see homelessness forever. And there's different versions of the word home. Like me, I have someone, when we're together, we call it home. Sometimes home is where you live, and sometimes home is where you are. Home isn't always just 4 walls and a roof. Sometimes home is safety. Sometimes home is peace. Sometimes home is the person you exhale around. And when life takes that away from you, whether it's a house, a relationship, a family, or stability itself, there's a kind of homelessness that happens inside too. Okay? So home can be more than just an address. It's safety, it's belonging, it's rest. It's where you don't have to be in survival mode. Some people lose a house. Some people lose a relationship. Some people lose their peace. And sometimes all 3 of those things happen at once. But when you really think about it, home is a deeper thing than we just say. It's, like I said, it's safety, it's peace. It's a place where you can breathe and not feel like the world is closing in on you. And when someone loses that, whether it's a house or a relationship or a family or stability, like I said, in their life, something inside them shifts. Because the truth is, when you're sleeping in a car or on a sidewalk or bouncing from place to place, it's not just the roof that's gone. It's the sense of belonging. And that's something many of us take for granted until it disappears. And that's why homelessness isn't just a housing issue. It's a human issue. Home is safety. Home is peace. This is the other part of homelessness that people don't talk about enough. It's not just about the cold nights or the hunger or the uncertainty or where you'll sleep. It's about becoming invisible. When someone is homeless, people often stop looking at them. They walk past them. They look away. They pretend not to see them. And imagine what it must feel like, not just losing a home, but feeling that you've disappeared from the world. Because no human being was created to feel invisible. Nobody was. Think about that. Most people who are homeless, they're not looking for pity. They're looking for a chance to stand back up again. Because sometimes the difference between someone staying on the street and someone rebuilding their life. It's just one person who decided to care sometimes, like that guy Tony. And I want to talk about music again. Music has always had a way of telling the truth about things society doesn't want to look at. And homelessness is one of those things. There are some powerful songs written about people who are struggling, forgotten, or just trying to survive. And I'm going to create a playlist in the description of this episode with a bunch of songs that capture that reality. And I'll mention one here, Another Day in Paradise by Phil Collins. Okay, it reminds us how easy it is to walk past someone who's hurting. It's a poignant social commentary highlighting homelessness, societal indifference, and the need for compassion. The lyrics, written from a passerby's perspective, contrast the comfortable. Paradise lives in the listener with the harsh realities faced by homeless, urging listeners to think twice before ignoring those in need. And I'm going to put a link to a little video of Phil Collins talking about the song. It's pretty interesting. And then I will put the rest of the playlist. It's going to be a full playlist of a bunch of other songs that I don't want to waste a lot of time listing them. But if you want to go listen to these songs, there'll be a bunch of them. I think I'm going to put 10 to 12 in there. A nice little playlist about homelessness, songs that relate to it. So just go take a listen to those songs. And as we said earlier, sometimes homelessness isn't just about the roof over your head. Sometimes it's about losing the place that your heart called home. I've had this happen to me. It's not a good feeling. And the other kind of homelessness, the physical home, try not to judge people that are homeless. Homelessness isn't always just the result of bad choices. Sometimes it's the result of a bad moment or a tragedy. It could be the job, or suddenly something happens and someone's whole life changes. So just try to think about that. Go back and watch my compassion episode. It was one of my earlier ones. We have to have compassion for people, because I just want to remind everybody how close anyone could be to it. And sometimes the hardest part of homelessness isn't just always the cold nights or the hunger. Sometimes it's the feeling that the world stops seeing you as a human being. Sometimes homelessness isn't just about losing the house. Sometimes it's about losing the place that your heart used to call a home. And they both hurt. They both hurt deeply. I just wanted to say again, most people are only a few bad breaks away from being in a situation that they never imagined. So maybe the next time we see someone struggling, instead of judging their story, we should remember it could have been ours. Okay? And I know I talked about the metaphor about having someone in your life and calling it home when you're together. Not a physical home, but home being together. And what I meant by that metaphor is when you lose that person, it's like you're homeless. So that was the metaphor. I thought it was very powerful. I want to just reiterate on that. I know it's easy for people to judge and look at people on the streets and say that they did this to themselves. I want you to think of it this way. When these people were born and they were little kids and stuff, none of them wanted to grow up and say, I want to be homeless one day, or I want to be on crack. Let's just try to be reasonable about it. That's all I'm saying. I wanted to talk about this guy, Bill, that used to go to a church I attended. This guy, Bill, I had a conversation with him one day about homelessness, and he actually lived on the streets for 3 years, and I forget where it was, what part of the state. It might have been even out of state, but he actually lived as a homeless person with homeless people for 3 years because he wanted to study it and see what it was all about. I had some interesting conversations with him about it. So while I was doing research for this episode, I came across a story that really moved me. It was about this homeless boy and his mom. And when I first read it, it actually brought me to tears. It was a great story. But after digging a little bit deeper and doing some more research, I realized that the story might not have been real. As much as I loved the message behind it, I decided I didn't want to share something on this podcast if I wasn't confident that it wasn't true. Because the truth is, real stories are powerful enough on their own. And like I said, when I dug a little deeper, I just had questions about whether the story was even real. And that's why doing research matters, because there's a lot of good information out there, but there's also a lot of things that get shared that aren't true. And you have all this AI stuff and all this fabricated stuff. So you have to be very careful. I was just talking to someone yesterday, she was telling me about these memes that she reads and stories, and that she's probably going to get off social media soon because a lot of them are just fabricated or they're not even true. And why even bring this crap into your life and get all emotional about it? It was just something we were talking about. But that being said, while I was researching all of this, something else kept coming back into my mind. I talked about a few weeks ago that I had a conversation with this young man outside of Market Basket when I was walking to pick up my car from the collision center. This guy was really struggling. You could see it in his eyes. And I talked to him for 20 minutes, and it was just, like I said, a real conversation, no judgment, just two people talking. And as I told you the story, when I looked him in his eye and I asked him if he had a son, I could just see his eyes start to water. And what I said to him, it sounded simple. I said, if you can't do it for yourself right now, then do it for him. Fight for him. Let him see his father get back up. Before I left him, I had talked to him for a while, and I told him earlier, my name's Glen, and I told him about my podcast, Cracked Open. I didn't have a business card or anything on me, and he said he did not have a phone, but he did have access to Facebook. He said something to me that brought back the memory and why this kid's been on my heart, and I still kind of want to reach out to him. When I said, I know you don't have a phone and you might not remember me, but I'll come back looking for you. He said, I remember you. Your name's Glen Nunes, and your podcast is Cracked Open. I was like, wow. And after 20 minutes, he remembered that. So I knew he was listening. I want to say something to him directly if he happens to be on Facebook and does look me up. And if he listens to this podcast by any chance, I just wanted to say, if you're listening right now, if you remembered my name and you found the show, I want you to reach out to me. You can find me here on Facebook. You can message me through the Cracked Open page on my personal page. I meant what I said that day when I said I'm rooting for you and you can do this for your kid. And if you need help with resources, I might be your guy. I might be able to help you. But I just wanted to say this to you if you're listening right now. Make the call and reach out to me, okay? Because the truth is, sometimes all it takes is one moment, one conversation, and one person believing in you to stand back up. Okay? And that brings me to another story that I came across during my research. This is the Ted Williams story. And when I came across this story, this one is a real one. It's about this guy named Ted Williams. And now when you hear the name Ted Williams, especially if you're from the New England area, I'm not sure where you're from or where you're listening from, but most people think about the legendary Boston Red Sox baseball player, the only player to bat over 400. But this Ted Williams is a very different story. This Ted Williams was a homeless man living in the streets of Columbus, Ohio. So this was around 2011. This guy, Ted, he had struggled with addiction for years. He's been homeless for a very long time, many years. And one day he was standing on the side of the road holding up a cardboard sign that said something simple but powerful. The sign said, I have a God-given gift of voice. I am an ex-radio announcer who has fallen on hard times. Someone stopped and asked him if he could demonstrate what he meant. And then this guy, Ted, started speaking. People were stunned. His voice sounded like a professional radio broadcaster. Deep, smooth, powerful, the kind of voice that you expect to hear on a national radio station. And that short video was posted online, and within days it went viral. Millions of people saw it. And suddenly, Ted Williams was being invited onto national television. He appeared on the Today Show with Matt Lauer. He spoke with Dr. Phil. And companies began offering voiceover work. Even the Cleveland Cavaliers offered him a job. But the reason the story is so powerful isn't just because the homeless man became famous overnight. It's because it reminds us of something important. Homelessness doesn't erase someone's gifts. Ted Williams had a talent that had been there the entire time. The world hadn't stopped long enough to hear it. So the viral video made it look like everything suddenly became perfect for him overnight. But reality was more complicated. After the video went viral in 2011, Ted said that he was suddenly on the Today Show. He appeared on the Dr. Phil show. He got tons of job offers from companies like Kraft Foods. I just said also that the Cleveland Cavaliers reached out to him. But the attention hit him very fast and very hard. And after years of homelessness and addiction, going from the streets to national attention overnight was overwhelming for him. He struggled with the pressure. He actually ended up entering rehab shortly after the viral fame. And I saw in video that he talked about faith and gratitude and how overwhelming the sudden spotlight had been, how he was still trying to rebuild his life. And that's what makes Ted's story even more real, that this overnight fame wasn't easy for him either. But I think this is important to remember, that getting a second chance doesn't mean the journey suddenly becomes easy. And I will put a couple of links to some of these videos that I watched of him in the description so you can see Ted's story. And this makes me wonder how many other people out there, they're just walking around with gifts, talents, and stories that we'll never hear, simply because we just walk past them. Because being homeless, it doesn't mean someone has nothing to offer the world. Sometimes it means life knocked them down and they're just trying to stand back up. It's pretty much it. Homelessness, it doesn't erase someone's gifts. You know, when you really stop and think about it, homelessness isn't always just about not having a roof over your head. Sometimes it's about losing direction. Sometimes it's about losing hope. Sometimes it's about losing the place where you feel that you belong. And I've been there, like I said, in my own way. I slept in my car with my dog in the middle of the winter, not knowing what the next step was. I met a young man outside Market Basket that was trying to figure out his life for the sake of his son. Then there's Ted Williams, a man who the world walked past for years before someone finally stopped long enough to hear the gift that he still carried inside him. So maybe the lesson in all this is just very simple. Never assume someone is finished. Never assume someone has nothing to offer. And never assume that someone who's fallen down can't stand back up again. Because sometimes the greatest comeback stories start in the darkest places. I've been there. And when I started this episode, I thought I was just going to talk about homelessness as something physical, people living in the streets. But the more I thought about it, and the more I realized homelessness can mean a lot of things. Sometimes it's losing the roof over your head. You know, sometimes it's losing the direction in life. Sometimes it's losing someone you love and the feeling that you don't have a place anymore. I felt that living in the car for a few days with the dog. I had no idea what the next step was going to be, and that little short experience had changed the way I look at people who are struggling, because sometimes the difference between someone standing on their feet and someone living on the street is just a few bad breaks or one person who shows them kindness. And I've said that many times throughout this episode, and maybe that's the real lesson in all this. Don't give up on people. Don't walk past someone who's hurting. And if you're the one that's going through this right now, don't give up on yourself either. Because sometimes the light at the end of the tunnel shows up when you least expect it. Being homeless, it doesn't mean that your story's over. And sometimes it just means that your story hasn't been written yet. And that's why stories like this matter, because they remind us that even when someone has lost everything, they haven't lost their ability to fight. Because being homeless doesn't mean your story's over. Sometimes it just means that your story hasn't been written yet. And that's why I want to keep stressing this. Because stories like this matter. They remind us that even when someone has lost everything, they haven't lost the ability to fight. And that's the point I want to make here today. That being homeless, it doesn't mean that your story is over. I know that feeling more than people realize, because like I said, with that time being in the car with the dog during the snowstorm, wondering what the next step was going to be. And when you're in that place, it's very easy to believe that things will never change. You know, stories like this, they remind us that when life cracks you open, you still have the power to write the next chapter. It doesn't mean that your future's gone, because the truth is, when someone decides they're not going to give up on themselves, incredible things happen. And that hope is still possible, even in the darkest situations. I'm going to put a link of a playlist of a few movie trailers pertaining to homelessness in the description. And you're just going to be able to click on the link and it will come up to a few links to trailers. You can just click on the trailers and watch them. If you're interested in watching the movies, then you can find them on YouTube. It's very easy to find them. The first one is called A Street Cat Named Bob. It was from 2016. It's a heartwarming biographical drama based on a true story of James Bowen. He was a homeless, recovering heroin addict in London, whose life was transformed after he adopts an injured stray ginger cat. The film highlights themes of redemption, friendship, and healing power of unconditional love. It's a really cool movie. That'll be one of them that's in the description. The next one is called Breaking Night. It's a true story about Liz Murray, who overcomes extreme childhood poverty, parental drug addiction, and teenage homelessness, then to graduate from Harvard University. The story focuses on resilience, self-determination, and unconditional love, showing how she used the trauma of her past to fuel a desire for a better life. And the next movie is called The Soloist. It's from 2009. It's a drama based on a true story about the unlikely friendship between an LA Times columnist, Steve Lopez, and Nathaniel Ayers. He's a Juilliard-trained cellist living with schizophrenia and homelessness on Skid Row. The movie explores themes of mental illness, the redemptive power of music, and humanity. And the last movie is The Lady in the Van. It's from 2015. It's a British comedy drama based on Alan Bennett's memoir about his true 15-year relationship with Miss Shepherd, an eccentric, homeless former musician who lived in a van in his Camden driveway. It explores themes of compassion, the burden of charity, and the hidden backstories of difficult people. And you can go watch these movies. I'm just going to put the trailers in the description, but if you have any compassion, watch it, and it will open your mind to a lot of things and make you think differently the next time you look at a homeless person. Okay, so the scariest part of homelessness isn't that it exists. It's realizing how many people are closer to it than they think. So after my experiences from all these conversations I've had with people who are homeless and listening to that guy Bill's perspective after living it for 3 years, I've concluded that homelessness doesn't start on the street. It starts when hope disappears. So when I hear stories like this and see people in these situations, it really makes me think, and I think it should make you think. It does make you wonder how someone ends up there. But here's the thing a lot of people don't realize. Sometimes the distance between being stable and being homeless is a lot shorter than we think. Like I said earlier, most of us believe it could never happen to us. We think homelessness is something that happens to other people who made the bad decisions and lost control of their lives. But the truth is, life can change a lot faster than we expect. As I said earlier, relationship falls apart, job disappears, medical issues. One major event in life knocks everything off track, and suddenly the safety net you thought you had isn't there anymore. And after going through that experience in my life, certain songs just started to hit a little differently, because music has a way of reminding us that we're not alone in our struggles. And when you think about compassion and helping people who are struggling, it's impossible for me not to think about what the Bible says about this. In the book of Matthew, Jesus said something very powerful. Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. So even Jesus himself experienced what it was like to have no home while he was doing his ministry. And throughout the Bible, we're reminded again and again to care for people who are struggling, the poor, the forgotten, the ones society pushes to the margins. And in Matthew 25, Jesus said something that really challenges us. He says, "When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was a stranger, you invited me in." And when the people asked him when they had done all these things, he said something incredible. "Whatever you did for the least of my brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." That means that the way we treat the most vulnerable people around us matters. Now, that doesn't mean every one of us can solve homelessness overnight. It's a complicated problem with a lot of causes, but there are still things we can do. Sometimes it's supporting organizations that work directly with people living on the streets. Sometimes it's volunteering at shelters, outreach programs. Sometimes it's donating clothes, food, or other resources. Sometimes it's simply acknowledging someone, treating them with dignity, instead of pretending they're invisible. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is just pray for them. Pray for the people who are struggling. Pray for the people who feel forgotten. Pray that they find help, hope, and maybe a path just back to some stability. Because compassion, it starts with seeing people as human beings. And that's what we got to remember. These are human beings. And when things get stacked up on top of each other, people can just end up in places that they never imagined they would be. And the other thing that this experience has taught me, that it's sometimes the difference between someone staying on the streets and someone getting back on their feet is one person willing to help. Like just in my situation I told you about, my buddy the firefighter who invited me by to stay at the station so I didn't sleep in the car during the storm, and my sister opening her door so I could just stay in her in-law apartment till I figured things out to get back on my feet. Those moments of kindness changed everything for me, and it reminds me that compassion can be powerful, and sometimes more powerful than we realize. But also be careful, because some people claim that they need help, and some people are just taking advantage. So there's a difference. There's one thing of being homeless, and there's one thing of being a user. So you got to be careful of this situation too. I'm not saying just open your door to anybody. Some people will just take advantage, and they will make excuses after excuse, and they can help themselves, but they won't. So just be careful, because there's a lot of people, like we talked about in my last episode, narcissists. They're just looking to take advantage of people. So watch out for them people, okay? And if someone that's not homeless, but they're just trying to take advantage of you, they were living somewhere before they try to take advantage of you. I have these other videos I'm going to be posting in the description. If you're moved by any of those videos, think about this. Do we just watch the videos and say, wow, that was very nice what that guy did. What a nice guy. But if we have an opportunity, each and every one of us, if there's a situation that arises and you can't help someone that's a real legitimate homeless person, not a user and not a deadbeat, talking someone that is legitimately in a tough situation, try to put the effort in and try to help them if you can. I'm not saying you get taken advantage of. I'm just saying be aware. And if the moment arises and you can help, I say do it. And what I said earlier, the most important thing you can do is pray for them, individually and collectively as a group. Maybe by name. Maybe if you know someone that's homeless, or you talk to somebody that's homeless, just pick them out. Pick them specifically out and pray for them individually. Make them part of your prayer life, because daily prayers matter. And being a prayer warrior, that matters. And God loves when we pray, and He loves when your heart's sincere. And He will answer you, and you will be blessed for it. And when you think about it, that's really what this conversation is about, right? Not judgment, not pointing fingers, but understanding how fragile life can be sometimes. Because the truth is, the people we walk past every day, the ones sitting on the sidewalks, the ones holding those signs, the ones sleeping in places most of us wouldn't last a single night, they all have a story. Yes, some of them have made mistakes. Some of them were dealt a bad hand. Some of them struggled with things most of us will never fully understand. But every one of them is still a human being. Someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's parent, someone who at one time had hopes and dreams just like the rest of us. And sometimes the difference between someone staying on the streets and someone getting back on their feet is one moment of compassion, one conversation, or one person willing to stop and see them instead of walking past them. And that could be you. Now, this conversation is not over. In the future, I'm going to have another episode here on Cracked Open, part 2 of Homeless. I'm going to actually have someone in the podcast studio who works directly with the homeless community, someone who sees this reality every single day. And we're going to talk about what really helps, what doesn't help, and how communities can respond with wisdom and compassion. Because homelessness isn't just a problem to talk about. It's a human reality that deserves understanding. So the next time you pass someone on the street who has nowhere to go, remember that the difference between their life and yours might be smaller than you think. And before we judge someone for where they ended up, we should remember that life can change for any of us faster than we could ever imagine. And if we believe we're called to love our neighbor, then sometimes our neighbor is the person the rest of the world has already walked past. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for someone who's lost everything is remind them that they have not lost their humanity. So let's take a moment and we're going to pray for people out there tonight who don't have a place to call home. So, Heavenly Father, we pray tonight for those who are struggling, those who feel forgotten, those who are living on the streets and wondering if anyone still sees them. So Lord, remind them that their life still has value, that their story is not over, and that hope can still find them even in the darkest seasons. And for those of us who have homes, stability, and people who care about us, help us never to take blessings for granted. Give us hearts that see others the way you see them, with compassion, with understanding, with love, and with hope. Amen. If there's one thing I hope people take away from this conversation is this: homelessness isn't always what people think it is. It's not always laziness. It's not always addiction. It's not always bad decisions. Sometimes it's just life hitting someone harder than they were ready for. And I know that because for a few days in my life, I was one of those people sleeping in the car during the snowstorm with Marshall, wondering how things could just change so fast. But I know for me, when that happened, I just didn't sit back. I worked very hard and I found the place as quick as I could, because sometimes a plan isn't laid out like a script. Sometimes things happen unexpectedly and hard, and we have to be ready for them. And we can't put burdens on everybody else. Sometimes, if we are capable, man up and figure it out. Okay? So just remember that. If you're in a position, you can do it. And you don't have to be a burden, or you don't have to take advantage of someone. I want this to be positive. So I'm just trying to say, you can get back on your feet. And all that experience I talked about, it taught me something I'll never forget. The distance between having a home and losing one, it's sometimes a lot smaller than we think. So the next time you see someone sitting on that sidewalk or holding a sign at an intersection, just try to remember that every person has a story. They have a life, they have a past, and a moment that brought them there. And sometimes compassion is the difference between someone feeling invisible and someone feeling human again. And maybe the real question we should ask ourselves isn't why are they there? Maybe the real question is, what kind of world do we want to be when we see them? And not to keep beating a dead horse, but most people think homelessness happens to someone else. But the truth is, most of us are only one crisis away from finding out how close we really are. Okay, so let that resonate with you. I want to just keep highlighting that because, like I said, one day I had a home and the next day I was sleeping in the car in a snowstorm with the dog. So that's how fast life can change. This is real stuff. Sometimes God lets life crack us open so we can see the people that we used to walk past. And remember what God says about homelessness. He commands people to care for the poor, for the hungry, and the homeless, viewing it as a fundamental act of worship, emphasizing that helping the vulnerable is helping Jesus, and stressing the inherent dignity and need for shelter for all individuals, with clear instructions to support those unable to support themselves. And sometimes homelessness doesn't always start on the street. Sometimes it starts in the moment that life falls apart faster than we can hold it together. And when I was talking earlier about people that I've approached and talked to on the street, and talking to that kid, there was nowhere else I'd rather be at that moment, because there's nothing worse than seeing someone hopeless. When you turn that P into an M, hopeless turns into homeless. And when you go to sleep in your own bed, say a prayer for someone who doesn't have one. So tonight, when you lay your head down on your pillow, remember, there are people out there praying for a piece of cardboard in a quiet corner of a sidewalk just to make it through the night. So the next time you walk past someone on the street, remember, that person isn't just homeless. It's someone's son, someone's daughter, someone who once had a life that looked a lot like yours. And if we like to admit it or not, the truth is, most of us are only a few bad days away from being exactly where they are. Home isn't always a house. Sometimes home is a person. Sometimes home is hope. And sometimes home is just someone who cared enough to see you. This is Glen Nunes, and this has been Cracked Open, and thank you for listening. If this episode meant something to you, please consider subscribing, sharing it with somebody who may need to hear it, and continuing the conversation. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for another human being is simply stop, listen, and care. So I will see you next time on Cracked Open. Remember, your integrity is your legacy. Treat your neighbor as yourself. And remember, karma has no favorites. I will see you next time. I love you guys. This is Glen Nunes, and have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Cracked Open. If today's episode spoke to you, please share it with someone who might need a little light in their own dark season. Remember, even in brokenness, there's beauty waiting to be found. Every crack is a place where the light can shine through. Until next time, stay true, stay hopeful, and keep your heart open.